Morning, everyone. My name is Richard Sutcliffe from Funding for Sport, and alongside Part Sport and Physical Activity Partnership, I'm here as part of the Happy Learn and Share event to do a funding presentation for you. As part of the presentation, we'll just be covering a few areas, in particular, some buzzwords that will help you with your application, some funding hints and tips, who can and can't apply for funding, and then finally, just move on to some really good funding streams that you could apply to. So, just first of all, starting on buzzwords, the use of jargon is discouraged when you're completing application forms. But as you go through forms, there's obviously certain words and phrases that are useful to get across depending on what your application is. And funders like to hear that. And some examples of that are disadvantage. If you are working with people from low income families, areas of deprivation, it's good to use words such as disadvantage, low income, deprivation. If you're working with people that are socially excluded and isolated, they are other good terms to use. In particular, and this is not just older people, but a lot of people can be vulnerable and lonely. And that's important to get across because funders want to obviously get people out and they want to get them active and not just physically active, but socially and mentally active. So those people that are vulnerable and lonely, if you can get that across to funders and they're aware of that, then they're more likely to fund your project. It's also good if you are working with low participation groups to name them. So, for example, in particular, people from deprived areas, people with disabilities, people from the BME community, um, women and girls, older people can be viewed by funders as being low participation groups in community activities, sport and physical activity. So if you are working with a particular group, it's important that you mention that. Um, a lot of what we do, it affects people's mental, physical, and social well-being. Funders like to hear that you're having an impact of that as part of your project. So they're also good words to get in. And also the impacts of your project. So they might improve people's confidence, self-esteem, depending on what you're doing. If you're doing areas around team building, it could be, things about working with others, developing friendships and relationships, and bringing the community closer together. So there's just some example of buzzwords that you can use. It's also quite important in an application that you use active and positive phraseology rather than sort of passive wording. So users will gain in confidence and develop new skills. We will ensure that users gain better access to. Users will not have access to or raised awareness of or the opportunity to, etc. What you don't want to do we hope they should be able to. They actually want that positiveness and activeness to sort of say, this is what we're going to do. We will do this. We will ensure that will happen. So just link to those kind of buzzwords. Sort of when you're doing an application, don't assume, don't patronize or generalize. If a funder doesn't know specifically what you're going for, and you just keep it nice and general, that won't support your application. Don't use acronyms or abbreviations because a lot of the time they won't know what that means. Don't constantly repeat things or keep things long, especially long sort of paragraphs, sentences, or long words. Gone are the days where you can just sort of use big words and almost think you can confuse the funder. If they don't understand it, they won't fund your project. And again, avoid using things like cliches. The things you do want to do is you want to personalize it and be quite concise, where you can give some supporting evidence. And don't be afraid to use bullet points where appropriate. Sometimes people are a bit worried about bullet points, but what bullet points do is they do keep things concise, and funders like that. So I'm going to go through a few things now and some funding hints and tips. First of all, it might seem silly when we've just talked about buzzwords, but avoid flooding the application with buzzwords. It's good to use those words when appropriate, but just trying to put every single buzzword into an application form, funders will see through it. So avoid doing that. avoid making grandiose claims. The refurbishment of our sports facility is critical to the future of sport in the UK. It's not. What it's going to do is it's going to make it a more welcoming and warm place for people to come to. Don't try and sort of say things like you're going to cover the whole area or you're going to get all 0 to 19-year-olds across your area active. You're not. You're going to take a small chunk of them, but you're going to make a big difference to their lives by doing so. Avoid assuming that the assessor has any knowledge of your club or your organisation or your situation or your needs. If you don't explain them to them and make it clear, then they won't know. And if they don't know, then you're not going to score your project highly. Um, Avoid applying for more money than you actually need. Just focus on what your project needs or what you need to deliver it, and then just go for that amount. Don't ask, avoid asking for all the money from the funder. Try and look at other ways that you can contribute to the bids, and that can come in different ways. It can come in things like fundraising or some reserves and budget, crowdfunding, but it can also become in kind. So if you're using a venue and somebody offers it for free, but normally they would charge £20, well, if you're running 10 sessions an hour at £20, then and they're going to offer it for free, then put that in as a £200 in-kind cost, or if they give you a discount, you know, put what you want in terms of discounted rate, but also include what it would have cost for full as in kind. So at least then the funder knows that there are contributions, whether that's coming from yourselves or elsewhere. Don't rush the application. Take your time, refine it, reread it, get it right. By doing that, it'll ensure that it reads nicely and that there's no mistakes. Be specific on geographical area and age groups. Touched on it before, but if you just say, "Oh yeah, well, we're going to cover all this borough and we're going to target every sort of age group," well, that's for a funder, that's just too broad. So you need to be quite, you know, condensed. So you might want to say, "Oh, well, we're going to focus on 16 to 18-year-olds from Hatfield, or we're going to focus on 8 to 15-year-olds in Welling." So that's the kind of sort of geography that you should be aiming at. Um, don't try to broaden things too much because you think it looks better. Again, keep it nice and concise. Um, it's important to maybe pass your application on to someone else to read. If someone else does read it, and they understand what your project is and what you want to achieve, give this to somebody not connected to your project as they're really kind of neutral, and then they'll be able to sort of, if they can understand it, then everybody should, and a funder should certainly. And the club or organisation might not always be the best applicant. It might be that you're working with a partner and that they're either better set up in terms of how they're governed, or just that they've got more chance of success. It might be that they're a charity or something. So, just think of that when you're doing an application. In terms of some sort of tips when applying for funding, be clear about your funding requirements before making an application. Ensure that you hit the selection criteria for the funding scheme and that it fits the aims and objectives of your project. Because sometimes we want to do a project and we think it's great and fantastic, but if it doesn't meet the requirements of the funder, they can't fund it. Be aware of funding deadlines and ensure that it's submitted before the deadlines. A lot of applications these days are online, and so because of that, they will have a cut off, but not all funding do. If you submit your application an hour later or even 5 minutes later than the deadline, most funders won't accept it. What's really important is don't start work on your project until the funding has been granted. I come across a lot of organisations that think they're going to get the funding, so they start the project. Then at the end of the project, they send in invoices and it's predated when they got the funding and funders won't pay for it. Okay, it's really clear funders won't fund things in terms of any respective costs. So just wait till you've got to the grant and then start your project. Does the club or the project have any internal funds it can contribute to it? Not all, but some funders do like that, as to previously touched on. So if you can contribute anything towards it, please do. Check how big the overall pot is. Um, from this, you can always get a good indication of the likelihood of success. So, if you go into somewhere like the lottery, awards for all, and it's got a massive pot, then going for 20,000 is fine. But if actually the overall funding pot is just 100,000 and you're going for something that's a national funding pot and you're asking for 20,000, well, that means in theory they could only fund 5 projects. So your chances of success are much slimmer. So just check that out before you apply. Once you've found a potential fund, speak to someone from the organisation and discuss the outline of the project. And just to check whether it is something that they would consider. Because again, if it's not, then you're just going to waste your time. Read all the guidance notes and funding criteria and be clear and concise. You only have a few words in a lot of these applications to get your point across. So avoid the waffle and writing too much and just keep it nice and concise because first impressions do last. And then finally, ensure that all the relevant sections are completed and that it's signed at the end. Again, a lot of these funding applications now are online, so it won't let you submit it if it's not, but not all funding applications are. And if you do miss something out, then obviously that could have a significant effect on your application. And if they do want to get hold of you, it's obviously important that you use your correct contact details and just double check that they are correct. Because if you get something wrong with your email or your telephone number and they can't get hold of you, they will try a few times and then they'll just reject your application on the basis that they couldn't get in touch with you to discuss it. I do come across that a lot. It's just a mistake sometimes, but unfortunately, sometimes those mistakes can be costly. Okay, so it's important to understand who can apply for funding. And I've listed there quite a few that can. Um, you need to be set up as not for profit because most funders, if not all, won't fund organisations that are privately limited or sole traders. And here is a list of those that they won't fund. So individuals, organisations out of the UK, anything that's deemed to be for profit. Um, Now you kind of get around this, and that's just working with a partner that is set up for not for profit. So I sometimes come across sole traders, maybe coaches that have their own business. If you're looking to deliver a project and you're working with an organisation to do it, and they're set up for not for profit, then if they've not applied to that fund, work with them to apply, and then they can get the money and you can go in and deliver. So I'm just going to focus now on the big sort of funders where you can get some nice chunks of money, so up to 20,000, 15,000. And the first one is the Lotteries Awards for All. So this is really good because you can apply for as little as 300 all the way up to 20,000. It funds project up to 2 years. It also funds project if it's just a year project, but it does give you some longevity by applying for up to a 2 year project, especially delivering 1 2 hour session a week. It means that in theory you can deliver that for 140, 104 weeks, which is really good in helping to sustain projects. At the moment, they're turning around applications in 8 to 12 weeks, and there's no deadline, which is really good because you can just ensure you get your project right and then submit your application. So, what are the funding priorities? Well, I think anybody who works in sport hits the top one. You're bringing people together who build strong relationships in and across the community. So whether you're working with a group of children across an area who you put on some activities and they come together, or whether it's a regular thing, over time they will make friends, they will develop relationships, and by doing so, they become strong bonds that hopefully will continue beyond the project. So most projects would hit that first priority. Improving places and spaces that matter to communities. Well, if something that you're doing, for example, is reducing antisocial behaviour, well, by putting that on, you're keeping kids off the street, you're keeping them out of trouble, or potential getting involved in that trouble. So what you're doing by that is improving the places and spaces for them because you're going to give them useful tools to improve the discipline, to build the resilience to maybe not get involved in those types of activities. And you're also going to improve it for the residents that live there because if there's less graffiti, if there's less gangs hanging around, less intimidation, it's going to improve their community. So again, a lot of what we do can also hit the second one, enabling more people to fulfill their potential. by working to address issues at the earliest possible stage. Well, again, that could come back to the previous one. If you're working with young people and it feels like they're causing antisocial behaviour in the area, well, by putting something on, you're working to address that issue straight away, and also you're giving children and young people skills that they can fulfil their potential. They can realise that they're good at this. And they might, for example, if you're working on a range of sports, they might realise that they're really good at one, and therefore they might go off and do that more, whether that's through a club, whether that's through more activity that you put them onto, or whether you just signpost them to where they can do it, or they might just do it in their own time. Um, so that's something again that potentially you might hit. And remember, you only have to hit one of these priorities. Or if you're supporting communities and organisations in areas where they're going to face more demands and challenges because of the rising cost of living. For example, if your project's in an active local area, or it's an area of high deprivation, then people have got to make decisions about how they spend the money. And so if you can support then by maybe putting sessions on for free, it might be in some cases, you're putting a bit of food on for them as well, then you're helping those families out. So potentially you could be hitting all four, or you might just hit one. But as long as you hit one, then it will fit nicely with awards for all. It's the stronger applications are those that focus on the benefits of the community rather than the organisation or the activity. So sometimes if you work particularly with a certain sport, let's pick football, you might be mad and passionate about football, but talking about football is the total opposite of what the funder's looking for. I would sometimes write a football application, not even mention the word football, because it's about the community, it's about the people that it's going to benefit. And that's what they want to hear about. What differences are you going to make to that community, to those people that you're going to engage? Clearly highlight the wider issues the community are facing. You can do that through the priorities, but also, if it is a deprived area, well, actually, what are the problems that are caused by that? Because it could be antisocial behaviour, but actually, it might just be that there's no antisocial behaviour in the area, but there's still nothing for young people to do. And so, because of that, the board or they stay in and then they become isolated and vulnerable, or it affects the social skills because they aren't engaging with other children and young people. Finally, they like you to show that the project is people led, so that they've come up with the idea rather than feeling like you've done it to them. And that could be going out and speaking to them. It could be things, interactions through social media. It could be surveys that you do. You might bring a focus group together or a meeting to find out what children and young people want, or pull parents together, or it might be that you attend a community meeting and that's where this sort of project comes from people at that meeting saying there's not enough for young people, activities for young people in this area, particularly, for example, in the holidays. So, can an organisation step forward and put something on for these young people? So the next one I'm going to move on to is Sport England's Movement Fund. Now, Sport England have just launched this. We launched it just at the end of April. So it's very much a replacement of their small grant scheme. And the main focus is supporting projects that match the goal of getting more people active, reducing the number of inactive people, and tackling long-standing inequalities. The priority is to support projects working with people in disadvantaged communities, but also low participation groups, which I'll come on to in a moment. Um, it awards things from £300 to 15,000, and money has got to be spent within 1 year. There's no deadline, um, and again, decent turnaround, 8 to 10 weeks. As part of the launching this scheme, they've developed four ambitions of what they're looking for in an application. Again, you don't have to hit more, all four, but the more you hit, the stronger your application will be. So encouraging positive experience of sport and physical activity, things that are going to get people engaged in what you're doing and do it for longer. Involving the community in the planning and delivery. So again, that it's very much about being community led, and maybe that they then take on that ownership, whether that's developing a team if you're a club, whether that's continuing the group that you've set up. It could be of volunteers going on courses that then they deliver these sessions going forward. Um, prioritizing environmental sustainability. This is quite new. They didn't focus on this before. So this is where by running your project, you can have a better impact on the environment. If you had a building, that would be might be potentially improving the efficiency of the heating, or draft-proof doors, or about insulating the roof. Um, but also it could be that as part of your project, what you do is you can add some education to it. So, for example, rather than constantly, using plastic bottles and buying plastic bottles full of water, that you encourage people to use water bottles. Or you might have other environmentally sustainable things, like encouraging people to walk to the session or to share cars when they're coming along. So they just like to feel of how you are looking at environmental sustainability. And that what you are going to provide is good use of public money. Sometimes, I see bids all the time and see people that have got coaches that are £25 an hour and others that are £50 an hour. If you're working with a large group, then the value for money might go down. If you're only working with a small group and you've got lots of coaches, they might deem that as not a good use of public money. Obviously, depending on the group you're working with, that might affect your ratios of sort of staff. But again, they will look at how many people are going to benefit from your project, how much you're asking for, how many sessions you're going to deliver as part of that, and together they'll make an assessment of why they feel it's a good use of public money. In terms of the groups, again, previously they were very focused on deprivation, but now they've widened that a bit more, about really sort of targeting groups that are low participation groups. So again, I know, for example, there's quite a lot of parts of Hertfordshire that's more affluent than maybe other areas of the country, and therefore less areas of deprivation. However, there will still be pockets or even groups across the whole area with people that are on low incomes, disabled people, or those with long-term health conditions, older people, people from diverse cultural cultural communities. They've got a focus that pregnant women and parents, girls aged 5 to 16, and so on and so on. So, if you are working with a low participation group, then, don't worry if you're not in a deprived area. The focus of the application is on those participants. So, just to give you an idea of the types of things that they will fund, not going to go through them all, but there's typical ones you'd expect, like venue hire, coaching courses. But they will also look at transport costs, marketing and promotion, um, putting people through all sorts of training, whether that's sport specific or whether that's first aid and safeguarding. However, there are things that they won't fund. So things like routine repairs and maintenance, existing activities or repeat of regular events. If you are going to do that, you need a good rationale of why you haven't sustained that activity. It could just be that you're wanting to, for example, it's an existing activity, but you can't accommodate more people. You've got a massive waiting list. So you wanted to put on another session. What requirements small grant funders expect is that you have at least three unrelated people on your governing body. Some funders will accept two, but the majority are asking for three. And this is all because of fraud purposes. So again, that's why they're wanting people that are unrelated. You need a UK bank account in your organisation's name with at least two unrelated signatories, a written governance document, constitution, and just the acknowledgement that membership is open to all. And by that, it means that you're not excluding anybody. So, for example, if your project specifically aimed at 5 15-year-olds, then obviously you're not going to invite older people along because it's specifically aimed at that age group. But what it means is that if a child comes along that's between 5 and 15, that you're not going to say, oh, well, you can't come along because it's only for people, that we know, or that come to our club. That if you are going to run some activities, that you do open it to all. And here are just some, and these slides will be shared. If you want to find out more about those, you want to speak to somebody or you want to email them, then please, get in touch. One thing to note, you find with the lottery that they say that if you are a sports organisation, they don't fund sport. They do. We write at least two bids a week. It's just that they're really keen that you demonstrate that it's the people that they and the benefits to those people that they're interested in rather than the sport itself. On top of that, I just thought I'd list a few other sort of smaller funds that you could go for. A lot of supermarkets do grants. They tend to work on tokens. It might be that they do it as part of giving so much for how much you spend. So co-op, they usually give 2p in every pound to a not to a nominated uh, project. They usually have three that you can choose from. So there's different ways that they do it, and there's links there to find out more. But sometimes those kind of local supermarkets are good ones to go for. And then at the bottom, I've done one called the Grantway. Now, Grantway is probably one of the best sort of search engines that I've come across. You can put your topic in, you can put keywords in, you can put your area in. And what that does is that it kind of really sort of condenses possible funding streams. You do have to be careful because anything like this is hard to maintain, and they have funding streams across the whole world. So some might be out of date. So you just need to check that. But as a norm, it's a really, really good one to sort of get some ideas of what funding is available for a particular type of project. And that's it. My details are there. So I'm sorry I can't be with you today, but if you want to get in touch with me, you can email me or you can give me a call or we can arrange to have a Zoom meeting. So if you've got a project in mind and you'd like to talk it through, which is the best fund to go for, will they fund this, won't they fund that, then please get in touch and I'd be more than happy to help. Thank you.